There is a manuscript that no museum will display. It has been passed between private collectors, buried in estate sales, photocopied by obsessive scholars in dim back rooms. Its pages are the color of old teeth. The ink has faded in some places to near invisibility, and yet the words that remain are impossible to dismiss because they describe, in precise and patient Arabic, a city that has never appeared on any map, a city in the middle of the Sahara Desert, a city of white walls, cool founts, and golden domes, a city where white birds circle endlessly overhead, birds that fly against the wind, never landing, never tiring. The manuscript calls it Zerzura, and according to every account we have, accounts spanning 600 years, from medieval Arab traders to 19th century European explorers, to a British soldier who went missing in the Western Desert in 1930. This city is real. No one who has found it has ever been able to find it again. The oldest records, the first written mention of Zerzura, appears in a 15th century Egyptian text called the Kitab al-Kanuz, which translates simply as the Book of Buried Pearls. It is a guide, not a legend, not a poem, a practical guide, the kind of text that merchants and travelers consulted before setting out across the desert. Among instructions for finding hidden wells and avoiding sandstorm seasons, there is a passage that stops cold everyone who reads it. It reads, "You will find the city of Zerzura like a white dove. It rests at the entrance of a valley that cuts between two mountains. Above the great gate of the city, there is a carved bird. Take the key from its beak and open the gate. Enter the city. You will find much treasure and the king and queen sleeping in their palace." The king and queen. Sleeping, not dead, sleeping. Scholars have argued for centuries about what this means. Is it allegory? A coded reference to buried wealth? A fairy tales dressed up in geographic clothing? Some believe the entire entry is metaphor. A spiritual journey described as a physical one, but then you read the accounts of those who claim to have actually been there, and the metaphor theory starts to crumble. The merchant of Fezzan, in 1481, a Libyan merchant named Mohammed al-Fassi completed a trade route from Tripoli to the deep Sahara and back. His travel diary, preserved in fragments, describes a detour he made on the return journey, alone, without his caravan, following directions given to him by a dying man at a desert well. The dying man, al-Fassi wrote, was not frightened. He was calm in a way that dying men rarely are. He pressed a piece of cloth into al-Fassi's hand, on which a simple root had been scratched with charcoal. 3 symbols, a crescent, a palm, and what appeared to be a bird in flight. Al-Fassi followed the route. He wrote about what he found in the measured, factual tone of a man describing a warehouse inventory. There are no exclamations in his account, no breathless wonder, just observation. The walls were white limestone, polished smooth. The gate stood open, both doors pushed wide as if expecting company. Inside, the streets were paved with flat stones laid in a herringbone pattern. There was no wind inside the walls. He noted this specifically because a sandstorm had been building outside, and inside there was perfect stillness. The fountains were running. This is the detail that stops every reader. Not the architecture, not the treasure, the fountains. Because fountains require a water source, and a water source in the deep Sahara requires either an underground aquifer of extraordinary size or something that cannot be easily explained. Al-Fass drank from the fountains and rested for 2 days. He found storerooms containing grain, old grain, he thought, but when he examined it, the seeds were not brittle, they were soft, alive. He found no people, he found evidence of people. Tables set, beds made, fires laid but unlit. The city looked like a place from which everyone had stepped outside briefly and simply not returned. On the morning of the 3rd day, Al-Fassi packed what he could carry, said a prayer, and left. He walked back into the desert the same direction he had come. He never found the route again. He tried twice more, and both times returned to Tripoli empty-handed and shaken. The city, he wrote at the end of his account, does not want to be held. The age of European obsession. By the early 19th century, the legend of Zerzura had migrated from Arabic manuscripts into European consciousness. and in the way of European consciousness at the time it became an object of conquest. The British and German explorers of the 1800s were not gentle people. They moved through the Sahara with rifles and arrogance, cataloging everything they could name, claiming everything they could plant a flag on. The idea that a city existed somewhere in that immensity, a city with gold, with treasure, with walls, sent them into a particular kind of fever. Several expeditions were mounted. Most failed quietly, their leaders dying of thirst or returning sunburned and broken, their sponsors quietly erasing the whole venture from the record. But in 1835, a Hungarian explorer named Laszlo Almásy, the same man who would later become the basis for the novel The English Patient, became consumed by the Zerzura question. He spent years crisscrossing the Libyan desert, mapping its dunes and its hidden valleys, interviewing Bedouin guides who had their own ancient knowledge of the desert's secrets. The Bedouin did not laugh at Zerzura. That was what Almásy noticed first. Every local he spoke to, every man who had spent his life navigating that merciless landscape, accepted the city's existence without question, not as legend, as geography. It is there, one elder told him through a translator. It is always there, but it shows itself only when it chooses to. Almásy recorded this without comment, but he underlined it 3 times. He never found Zerzura, but in the Gilf Kebir Plateau, a vast, almost inaccessible highland in what is now southwestern Egypt, he discovered something that changed the Zerzura debate permanently. A valley no European had ever mapped, containing ancient rock paintings of cattle, swimmers, and human figures, in a landscape that receives almost zero annual rainfall. The Sahara was not always a desert. There was a time, thousands of years ago, during what geologists call the African humid period, when this entire region was green. Lakes, rivers, grasslands, a place where civilization could have flourished. And if civilization flourished there, what became of it when the rain stopped? The soldier who walked into the desert. In 1930, a British soldier named Ralph Bagnall was leading a motorized survey of the Libyan desert when one of his vehicles broke down far from any settlement. While his men worked on the engine in the punishing afternoon heat, Bagnall climbed a ridge to get a better view of the landscape. What he saw made him reach for his compass and notebook. He wrote, carefully, cliff wall running NNW, white in color, height approximately 200 feet. Valley between 2 parallel formations. At the valley mouth, structure, possibly natural, possibly not, resembling a large archway. He descended, reported what he had seen, and the group debated turning toward it. They were low on fuel. The detour would cost them. In the end, they drove on. Bagnall spent the next 30 years trying to find that valley again. He helped found the Long-Range Desert Group during World War II, sending jeeps deep into terrain that would kill most men. He used every resource he had. He mapped the Western Desert more thoroughly than anyone before him. He never found the valley. At the end of his life, in a letter to a colleague, he wrote, I don't speak of Zerzura anymore. People smile when you do. But I know what I saw on that ridge in 1930, and I know that it was not a natural formation. And I know that I cannot explain it. Tup. What the desert hides. Here is what we know about the Sahara that most people do not. The Sahara is not empty. It has never been empty. Beneath its surface, beneath thousands of years of accumulated sand, lie the ruins of a world that was buried rather than destroyed. Ancient riverbeds that once carried water in volumes comparable to the Amazon. Underground aquifers the size of small seas formed when the rains fell and the land was green. Stone cities, partially uncovered by shifting dunes, then covered again with the next wind. In 2011, satellite radar imaging of the Sahara revealed something extraordinary, a network of ancient roads, invisible from the ground, stretching across Libya and Chad and Egypt, roads to places we have no record of, roads built by people we cannot name. The Sahara does not give up its secrets easily, but occasionally it gives up the edges of them. In 2014, a group of Libyan nomads reported finding a valley in the Fezzan region, an area of southwestern Libya that had been off limits to outsiders for decades due to political instability. The valley, they said, contained ruins, white stone ruins, with carvings above a large archway. They took photographs. The photographs were blurry, shot on an old phone, difficult to interpret. But the carvings above the arch, in one image that has been analyzed by 3 separate archaeologists, appear to show a bird with its wings spread. The Libyan civil war made follow-up impossible. The nomads could not be relocated. The valley has not been visited again. The traveler's account, I want to tell you about one more account. This one is recent. This one I cannot verify. I am including it because it is the most complete description of Zerzura ever written, and because the man who wrote it was not a medieval merchant or a colonial-era explorer. He was a 34-year-old geology student from Cairo who got lost in the desert in 2009. His name is Ahmed. He asked me not to use his last name. I met him in Alexandria in a cafe near the waterfront, where he spoke quietly and did not look out the window. He had been mapping rock formations in the southwest of Egypt, working alone, which he admitted was foolish. His GPS unit failed. His compass, he believed, was affected by something in the local geology. A magnetic anomaly, he said, though he could not later find evidence of one on any survey. He wandered for 3 days. On the 3rd night, he saw light, not starlight, not the moon, light from below, from structures. Warm, amber light, the kind that comes from lanterns or fires, not from electricity. He walked toward it for 2 hours. He found a city, white walls, an open gate inside. The temperature dropped by what felt like 15 degrees. He had a small thermometer on his pack and checked it twice. It read 12 degrees Celsius. Outside in the desert night, it had been 28. He describes the inside of the city for 11 pages of his account, which he wrote and rewrote over the following year. I will condense it here. The streets were clean, not swept clean. Clean in the way that a place is clean when it has been maintained, when someone has cared for it daily. There were no weeds between the stones. The fountains were running, 3 of them, in separate courtyards, all flowing with cold, clear water. The gardens inside the compound walls contained plants he could not identify, low, dark-leafed, flowering with small white blossoms. He found a room in a building near the central palace, a small room with a raised sleeping platform and a single narrow window that looked out onto a courtyard. He lay down. He slept better than he had slept in years. In the morning, he explored more. He found the library. The room was large, larger than he expected from the outside, a spatial impossibility he glossed over in his account with the phrase, "The proportions confused me." The shelves were stone, carved from the walls themselves. The books, he called them books, though he later qualified this as something like books or scrolls, or neither. I am not sure I have the right word. Were made of material he could not identify, not paper, not leather, something between the two, supple and dense and odorless. He could not read them. The script was unlike anything he recognized. He spent 4 days in the city. He saw no other person until the evening of the 3rd day. He looked across a courtyard and saw a woman standing in a doorway. She was dressed in white. She looked at him for a long moment, then went inside. He did not follow her. He cannot explain why. It did not feel like the right thing to do, he wrote. Some places have a grammar. You learn it without being taught. On the morning of the 5th day, he woke and walked to the gate. He did not consciously decide to leave. He simply walked, as if his body understood something his mind did not. Outside, the desert was ordinary, hot, bright, endless. He was found 6 hours later by a Bedouin family with a truck. He was 12 kilometers from a road he had been, within walking distance of the entire time. He reported none of this to anyone official. He kept his account private for 8 years. He shared it with me on the condition that exactly as he gave it, without embellishment. He has one final note. At the end of 11 handwritten pages, the birds were there when I arrived, white birds, large, circling above the walls. When I walked back through the gate, I turned and looked up. They were still circling. I watched them for a long time. They never came down. They never stopped. They flew as if the concept of fatigue had simply never occurred to them. The question that remains here is what I believe, and you can disagree with me. I believe Zerzura exists, not as a fairy tale, not as a hallucination born of heat and thirst. Though I grant that heat and thirst explain many things, I believe it exists as a physical place, a valley or a plateau, or a depression in the desert floor, where something ancient survived because the desert protected it by being impassable, by killing anyone who came too close, by rearranging itself whenever someone got a bearing they should not have gotten. The Sahara is larger than the continental United States. It is one of the least surveyed regions on Earth. There are valleys in the Gulf Kabir that no human being has visited in living memory. There are satellite images that show anomalies, structural anomalies, geometrically regular, the kind that do not occur naturally, that have not been investigated, because the political situation makes investigation impossible. I believe that somewhere in that expanse, in that ocean of rock and sand and silence, there is a city. I believe its gate is open. I believe there are fountains running inside its walls in defiance of all hydrology. And I believe that above it, always, in lazy and impossible circles, white birds fly against the wind. Whether it wants to be found is a different question entirely.